everybody. You're listening to Fireside Paranormal Podcast. My name is Jordan Cline, and again, we have a great, fun show for you today. My guest today is Delilah Ryan. She is a professor at West Virginia Northern, and we're going to be celebrating Women's History Month with some horrible HERstories. Before that, we do have some announcements. My friends over at Wicked Cat Clothing, spooky season doesn't last just a month. Shop Wicked Cat Clothing year-round to get your horror, paranormal, spooky, and Halloween apparel. Go to wickedcatclothing.com. Shop apparel and accessories now and save 30% off with the code FIRESIDE30. We're also trying out this new partnership with Newsly. Newsly is an audio app for iOS and Android. It picks up web articles about the most trending topics on the web at any given moment and reads them to you in a natural human voice. For the first time in the history of the internet, the entire web becomes listenable. Browse articles from topics you choose and start playing. Stop scrolling, start listening. You can follow any topic as specific as you'd like, from sports, science, to Bitcoin, or even the Kardashians. It'll find you the latest articles and read them to you aloud. They also have podcasts, so explore trending podcasts from over 50 countries. My show, Fireside Paranormal Podcast, is there too. Download and use Newsly for free now from www.newsly.me or from the link in the description, and use promo code FIRESIDE, where the eyes are ones. I'll also put that in the description, and you receive 1 month free premium subscriptions. The new issue of American Paranormal Magazine is out. Make sure you get it, because one of our past guests, Jose Gonzalez and Angel, their group is highlighted in it. So make sure you check that out. And I'm going to give a little plug for my friend Kristen with the Paranorm Girl podcast. Make sure you subscribe to that. And I'm going to play her promo real quick.
Have you encountered something you can't explain? Do you believe in the paranormal but haven't experienced it? Are you a skeptical believer too? My name is Kristen, and I host the Paranorm Girl podcast. My show is an education in the paranormal. Join me as we explore a different topic each season and dissect origins, theories, experts, and so much more. Whether it's life after death, cryptids, ghosts, or any other paranormal topic, we will pull it apart and put it back together again to fully understand it. If you're a fascinated skeptic, a believer yearning to know more, if you're looking for an education in the paranormal, I'm your Paranorm Girl.
Again, definitely check her show out. The season she's working on right now is about demons. Very interesting stuff.
Are you looking to start a podcast? Then see this episode's show notes for our unique promo code to get up to 2 months of free podcasting service with Libsyn when you sign up for a new account. Get your show on Apple and Spotify. Get helpful audience-building stats and all the support you need to sound your best. They can even do video. Bring your podcast to life and have your voice heard here, there, and everywhere with Libsyn. Again, see our show notes for our unique Libsyn promo code and get podcasting.
For those of you that do not have access to the show notes, the promo code to that is Fireside. So if you're wanting to get into podcasting, or if you're podcasting and looking for a better place to host, I strongly support Libsyn. I've actually had a Libsyn account since 2008, so I'm definitely a supporter. Today's featured story, I'd like to get into our featured story now. It comes in from Sarah.
My name's Sarah Sullivan. I'm from Moundsville, West Virginia, and I own my own business, Diva by Sarah. So me and my fiance were out at our farmhouse, which is pretty far out of town. About 15 minutes, and there's not another house for at least a half a mile, so I mean we're completely secluded, and we were just out there doing some work around the house, you know, the normal stuff. And I was actually in the house. He was over by the creek, which is a couple 100 feet away, trying to fix our electric fence out there. And next thing I know, he comes literally running in the house, running, freaking out, and he's a big muscle guy, you know. So I was like, what is going on? And he was like, you didn't hear that. And I said, no, I did not hear that. And he said it sounded like an animal screaming, like just, I mean, more of like a siren, like almost like a fire siren, but from an animal. It was very difficult to describe. So he was trying to tell me, and he's like, I'm not going back out there. Like, there is no way I'm going back out there. He's like, get the gun, come back. Like, if we're not going anywhere until you get that gun.
Save the day,
yeah, I have to, yeah. You know, big gym fanatic, and he's running in the house trying to get me. So I said, okay, well, let's just go outside and see if I hear anything. And so I go outside. We're standing on the porch, and I was asking him, where was it that you heard this sound? And he was showing me, pointing. He's like, I'm not going back over there. I'm not going back over there. I said, okay, well, now I have the gun. We can walk around and see if we hear anything. Didn't hear anything for probably 10 minutes. And I said, well, I don't hear anything. I don't know what you're talking about. So we were like, okay, we're just going to go ahead and head home, go back to town. Yeah. And we literally started to get in the car, and I heard it.
You heard it too?
I heard it. And it sounded, the only way that I can describe it is a fire siren going off, but vocally coming from an animal. And it started very high-pitched, slowly came down in pitch, probably lasted 10 or 15 seconds. Oh, man. And it was loud. It was so loud, and I couldn't believe it. And I just stood there with my mouth open staring at him. And I was like, what was that? So now I'm intrigued. I'm like, what was this? I mean, I was out there my whole life as a child.
Don't worry, honey, I'll protect you.
That's right. I got this. I was like, I've heard a lot of animals out here over the years since I was a kid. I've never heard anything that loud or that big and that kind of a sound. So we actually got in the truck, and I still had the gun, and there's another barn up the road. And I thought, what was odd is I had went past that barn at one point, and the door was actually ripped open. And it was actually the barn door had started to sink, so it was kind of in the dirt. You couldn't hardly get it open. And I noticed beforehand that it was ripped open. So I thought, that's kind of intriguing. Maybe we should go back up that way, because why was that barn door, ripped open?
You ain't scared of nothing.
No. Now, I don't know that I would go in there, but I thought I'd like to look from a distance and just see if I see anything in there that would make that kind of a sound. And we did go back up there. We drove up and down the lane. We went past the barn. We tried to look in there from a distance, didn't see anything. I have never heard it again. I have never heard anything like that in my life. I've never heard it as many times as we've been out there after that. We always stand there and listen because we always are curious. Is it still here? Not yet. But then actually, me and my mom were out there, maybe a week or so ago. And what was interesting is in the exact same place that my fiance heard it, where he was standing in that same spot, there was a dead deer, but it wasn't just a dead deer that somebody had shot and left. This is on our property, fairly close to the house. And all its fur was just laying, not the hide, just the fur was laying in one area. Oh, wow. The actual deer was 15 or 20 feet away. Its head was missing, and there was only, I think, one leg left.
Oh, something to shoot into that.
Yeah, and it wasn't the fact it looked like animals had just been into it, and, there was a lot of hide left, and there was a lot of meat left. It was just fur in one area, and then parts of a deer left in another, like it had drug it. And, I mean, there could be coyotes out there, but it was surprising that it was moved that far, and that many body parts were missing.
And in the same place
in the exact same spot that he had initially heard it. So we've always been intrigued about it, and now we just say there's a Bigfoot in Roseby's Rock.
Thank you, Sarah. And if you want your story to be one of our featured stories, make sure you send me an email, firesideparanormalpodcast@gmail.com. All right, I want to get to my guest. Join me by the fire as we welcome Delilah Ryan. She is a professor at West Virginia Northern, and we are going to be discussing Horrible HERstories. Delilah, you with us?
Yes, I am.
Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Well, thank you for having me on this show.
Hey, I do want to let everybody know this is a really crazy how we met story, right? So Miss Delilah is a professor at a local college. She's actually about 20 minutes the school's about 20 minutes from where I live, so it's in this area. And she had messaged me. I guess, I don't know if you listened to the show first or just saw it on Facebook. Which was it?
I had listened to the show, and then I had gone to Facebook and saw your name and thought, wait a minute, I know this person.
Yeah, she actually had a student named Jordan Cline in her class. What? And she thought it was me. It wasn't me. Apparently, in the town that I live in, which is not very big, there is another Jordan Cline. So it sent me on a mission. I had to go and look for this person. It is a lady who lives in the area, but it was really cool, to find out you have a name twin, in the same area. I don't think I have that common of a name. I mean, I'm sure other folks are like, yeah, I know plenty of them, but I don't. So pretty cool way to meet somebody.
And I thought the same thing. I thought, well, for being in this area and having the same name, that has to be my student. And I was shocked when you were like, nope, not at all.
and I'm not saying that I sound like a lady. Like, it was an online class. So she didn't listen to the show and be like, that sounds a lot like the girl I had in class.
Disclaimer, yes.
Yeah, let me put that little side note in there.
That's right.
All right, Miss Delilah, we are talking about Horrible HERstories. Tell me what that is.
Well, it's Women's History Month in March, and I was doing a presentation for my college that I teach at, and I wanted to do something a little different, because when most people do some type of a presentation for Women's History Month, it's on women's suffrage or on some type of a movement of some sort that women are involved with. And you get some people who are interested and come to your presentation, and more than likely you don't get very many. So I thought, well, what do people like? What are people interested in? And I thought, I know a lot of people who are interested in the supernatural. And one of the big topics, of course, are ghosts. And since I'm a historian in researching things in the past, you often find ghost stories associated with certain people or certain events. So a lot of times when I'm talking about those people or events in a class, I kind of throw in the ghost story to kind of get a little bit more spicy, make it a little bit more interesting, lively.
Yeah.
Lively. Okay. One of my bad teacher jokes.
No, I was picking up. I too have that kind of humor. You should see the hate mail I get for it.
Oh no. So I thought, okay, I'll do what I called Horrible HERstories, because that was a big thing, I guess, in the second wave of feminism in the 1990s. There was a push there to change history when you talk about women to herstory. We don't use it anymore, but it's kind of a fun little play on words. So that's why I called it Horrible HERstories with the alliteration. And the presentation that I gave for my college was not just ghost stories, but it was also true crime. And the reason why I tried to do both of those, I know we won't have time for true crime tonight, but I tried to do both of those because it seems that really we've been seeing, as we get into the 21st century more and more, there's a big crowd. It's very popular for people to be interested in the supernatural. And also recently, true crime has become very, very popular for people to read about, watch about. And with both, there's often a very large group of women who are interested in both. So I thought, well, this all goes hand in hand. It's Women's History Month. I can talk about female spirits. I can talk about, female serial killers, kind of mix all these things together. And also when I did it for, again, my school, I kind of put an academic slant with it. Kind of how do these things go with our psyche? How does this go with the national consciousness? All these types of things. But what I thought we could talk about tonight, to keep it short and to not bore people into an academic lecture, I thought we could kind of just tell some of the stories, some of the fun stories.
Tonight is a 4-hour lecture, so strap in, y'all. No?
That's right.
Hey, I do want to say we could maybe throw some true crime in. I don't know if you have stories ready. I've been getting so many emails that I should mix in some true crime into.
Oh, sure.
And I think it's because true crime is so big now that even paranormal folks are like, yeah, I kind of want to hear about that part too. So, so that way they don't have to listen to another show. You can listen to it all right here.
That's right. And often, and that's kind of what I thought, they go hand in hand, not just because of the popularity, but a lot of these true crime stories are so horrendous, really, in many ways, that you hear ghost stories about them afterwards anyway. You
Yep.
hear supernatural occurrences. So I was kind of doing that in my last session as well. And of course, my big tagline was, come for the ghosts, stay for the murder. That was how I was dragging people in. I was hoping. So I wasn't sure what you wanted me to start with exactly, or how to go into our discussion. Did you want to hear more about some national stories, some regional, as in West Virginia stories?
Let's hear it.
More
Let's start off.
unknown?
Let's start off with like a West Virginia story. Can we do that?
Okay. Sure. My favorite, and I think that most people would say the most famous of the West Virginia female ghost stories, is the Greenbrier Ghost. Are you familiar with that one, Jordan?
We have lots of folks that may not be. Remember, we have listeners outside of the state too that might be completely
Mhm.
oblivious. So start kind of at the beginning and go with it.
Okay. I didn't know if you wanted to throw something in, as in, I went and saw the marker or the grave.
Oh no,
or...
I haven't.
Okay. Well, it's out in the middle of nowhere. I will say that because I have actually gone and seen the marker and the grave site. So really going into the wilds of West Virginia if you want to see that. But the story of the Greenbrier Ghost is, as you can imagine, near Greenbrier, West Virginia, which is down around Monroe County in the Greenbrier area. We'll see that it's a very rural region. It was known for, in the 19th century, things like forestry. That was a big thing. There was some forest agriculture, like orchards and things. Probably also well known in that region, if you think of the Greenbrier Resort being kind of the fancy thing that's there. That was a region where the very wealthy industrialists would go and spend their summers because you have air conditioning.
For those of you that are not familiar with West Virginia, you might have seen the movie Wrong Turn, which takes place in Greenbrier.
I was trying to give it a nicer edge.
Oh, okay. It's a very, very well-established place. Super, super nice. But then, there's also Wrong Turn.
Exactly. And, there's stereotypes everywhere. So, yes. But if you think of paranormal and creepy true crime kind of ideas, right, we tend to think of things like Wrong Turn.
Yeah.
Well, again, very rural area. And this story goes about in the latter part of the 19th century, in the 1890s. There is going to be a woman, and her name is Zona Hester Shue, and she's married to a man named Edward Shue, who goes by the name Trout. That's his nickname.
Uh-huh.
And she's going to pass away, and there's some mysterious circumstances around this. So I'll just tell you the general summary and then the details. Once she passes away, her mother starts having these visits or dreams, depending on who you talk to, where her deceased daughter comes to her and tells her that her husband killed her. It wasn't an accident, as had been put forward, that he actually killed her. And what transpires from this is there's actually going to be a court case that comes about that talks about they're going to investigate how or if this man actually committed murder. And it leads to all different types of speculations. And eventually he is going to be tried and convicted for her murder. So a little bit more to make it a little more interesting, but giving that general summary. What occurs is that Zona is going to find this man. I say find because she had kind of been out of the area where she grew up. People said different reasons. She had some family issues. There's always this, maybe she was pregnant and they tried to send her away, those kinds of things.
Uh-huh.
Well, she's going to meet a man named Trout. Again, it's his nickname, Trout Shue. When she's out and about near Pocahontas County, she'll actually meet him. And the mother of Zona was not really impressed with this man, Mary Hester. She thought this was not the kind of man she wanted her daughter to be involved with. He was older. He didn't have a lot of monetary assets. Plus, there were some rumors that he wasn't a good guy. His first wife had divorced him, which is unusual for the end of the 19th century for a woman to put forward divorce proceedings. That's a pretty big step for the woman to do that. So she divorced him because he said that he had abandoned her and their child. And he really didn't fight back on that. He kind of let that go. So many people felt he admitted that he abandoned her and his child. Plus, she would say throughout the years that he was abusive towards her and the child. And before he died, he never really went up against that either. So people kind of held that against him as well. Then he was married again, and his second wife died kind of mysteriously. He was outside in a snowstorm for some reason fixing the roof, and she walked underneath where he was fixing the roof, and a brick accidentally fell off the roof and hit her in the head, and she died. Ooh. Which is, a little strange. A little strange.
Bricks fall off roofs all the time, though, right?
Yeah, especially if you're fixing your roof in a snowstorm. It could happen, yeah. So, you never know, right? But he was never tried for it or anything, and so, life went on for Trout. So he meets Zona, and again, she's younger and vivacious, and they fall in love. And they get married. And Mary, the mother of Zona, not impressed, but what's done is done. They're married. So they come back to the Greenbrier area, and they're living their life. And so what happens is, when she passes away, the story that everyone gets is that Trout Shoe had gone out and about doing his daily business at his blacksmith shop. And he went to a nearby house and asked the son of the household, a younger man, or younger boy, I should say, if his wife was going to need anything from the store. Could you run over and ask her if she's going to need anything? I'm going to go get some things. Mm-hmm. Well, when the boy runs over to see, apparently, she's on the floor dead. And it looks like she's fallen from the steps. It looks like she's taken a tumble down the stairs and fallen and broken her neck. Well, the weird parts start happening here. When Trout learns of this, he goes back to the house, and when the doctor is called in to make the official call if she's dead or to resuscitate her to see what's going on, Trout doesn't want her around. He doesn't like that. The quote that Dr. Knapp said later when he was in the trial, this is out of the Greenbrier Independent, he said that she requested to make no further examination of the body. He insisted in dressing the body, and in doing so, put around the neck a high collar and a large veil, several times folded and tied in a large bow under her chin. That the head was observed by a number of witnesses to be very loose upon the neck and would drop from side to side when not supported. Mm. So that's actual testimony. Yeah. That's testimony from the doctor. And it's also weird that he was insistent on dressing the body and picking out the clothes, because at this point in time, women were the ones in charge of preparing bodies for funerals in the homes. So that was often thought of as strange, even at the time. The ladies, particularly Mary, the mother, did not like this. They felt that was their job and that Shoe was taking it over from them. Mm. Of course, they said, he's upset. His wife's dead. It was this horrible accident.
He's put up a good appearance.
It can make sense. You might want to do that. He wants to pick out the dress and make her look good and just not be away from her, not be away from her body. It could be that, right? It could be. So this is when, they bury Zona, and the mother starts having dreams after the daughter has been buried. So what she does, once she says she's had these dreams, she's going to go to the county's prosecuting attorney and say, I think my daughter's been murdered. And he's going to say, well, why? And she'll say, it's because I've been having these visitations from her. And he, probably because he knew, and a lot of people already knew, that this Trout Shoe was kind of maybe not the most respectable character. So, all right, we'll put him on trial, see if there are other people who can support this, since the doctor also had some suspicions, had voiced this as well with the mother. So they brought forth a bunch of different people, put him on trial, and they used the evidence that the mother had these visions or these dreams to find out if Zona had actually been murdered. How did she die? Because what she'll testify to in court, the mother will say, and this is in the Greenbrier Independent, the local newspaper, Mary Hester said, she came back and told me that he was mad that she didn't have no meat cooked for supper. But the second night, she told me that her neck was squeezed off at the first joint, and it was just as she told me. because she says this after they exhume Zona's body. So it's been a few days.
So the
they
mom,
exhume her.
just so I'm clear, the mom didn't know that it was something wrong with her neck, correct?
Not really. They were suspicious, though.
Okay.
Because there was this big ribbon that was around her neck and this veil that was over her. They thought something was strange. They thought that was a very odd way to dress her, in a funeral shroud. So she kind of had some suspicions, I think the mother did, that there was some foul play afoot, but not necessarily, was her throat slit? Was she strangled? The mother wouldn't have known any of that. She was just suspicious something was not right. So they do exhume the body, and when they do find that her neck was broken, which could have happened, if she fell down the steps, but her windpipe was crushed, and it was appearing that the way the windpipe was crushed, something had strangulated her. It wasn't just a fall down the stairs that would have caused her to break her neck. So he's going to be found guilty for this. And some people will argue, well, he himself, his personality maybe was more on trial than what happened to Zona, since he had some kind of questionable things in his past. But regardless, it's still considered a legal tale and a story that gets precededly told by people who are interested in ghost lore, but also in law schools, people will talk about this idea of bringing this type of evidence in. Now, today we'd say it's probably circumstantial, but it's still considered one of the only cases where a ghost, their voice came forward and helped in some type of legal court issue. So if you would see the historical marker for the Greenbrier ghost, it will say, interred in a nearby cemetery is Zona Hester Shue. Her death in 1897 was presumed natural until her spirit appeared to her mother to describe how she was killed by her husband, Edward. Autopsy on the exhumed body verified the apparition's account. Edward, found guilty of murder, was sentenced to the state prison. Only known case in which testimony from a ghost helped convict a murderer.
How about
that's
that?
Pretty impressive.
How about that?
Definitely something.
That's a heck of a story, too.
Oh, yeah. It's a fascinating story. And we'll see that Trout, or Edward, he does go to the state prison, and he passes away in 1900. There is a flu epidemic, not the major one of 1918, but a flu epidemic that swoops through the penitentiary, and he'll pass away from that. And the reason why I kind of wanted to mention that is I know this past weekend there was a big expo that you were at here in Moundsville.
That's
which is
right.
Where,
Is that where he was put at? He was put at the West Virginia Penitentiary?
Yes, he was put in the state penitentiary, so that would have been the West Virginia Penitentiary.
That
was built and opened in 1867, and then it closed down everything by 1995. So it was in the state quite a while.
How about that? Yeah. So you actually, and I want to dig into it just for a second, you have some personal attachment, I want to say, to the penitentiary, correct?
Yes. I grew up in the area. Actually, I grew up in Glendale, West Virginia, which is the small town next to Moundsville. And in my adult life here, I have lived in a house that's a few blocks away from the penitentiary. So as a child, without giving away my age, I was growing up before the penitentiary shut down.
Well, it didn't shut down. It was the 90s, wasn't it?
Yeah, so it was rather recently, we'll say, yes.
So you're at least
recently.
Older than, I'll say 20.
Yes, we'll say that. A little older, but very little older than 20, we'll say. But that was always a looming part of the area, the economy, the social events that occurred, which you might think is strange. But for example, one of the big things that what I remember socially in the community that the penitentiary was such a part of, when the local schools would have dances, for example, the local high school wasn't too far away from the penitentiary.
Yeah.
When it had prom, the prisoners would do the backdrops. They would do all the decorating. They would paint all the murals and things, which now sounds strange to me. But at the time, that's just how it was. Kind of did that. There was an ice cream shop that everybody loved that was across the main road where the penitentiary was, the front of the penitentiary. And it was just assumed that you would go out there and the prisoners would shout at you and you would shout back, either good or bad things, but it was just kind of what you did. That's kind of how the town was. Now, again, looking back, that's strange, but no one thought that was strange at the time. No one thought that was odd or not. But my tie, at least you might say professionally, that we talked about, Jordan and I talked about, was when I first was getting out of graduate school for my first portion of that with my master's program. The penitentiary had been shutting down, and they were starting to allow people in to kind of go through records and look at the place and decide what to do with it, really. What are you going to do with this massive building? So I went in as a history student, as a budding historian, and went through a lot of the administrative papers, some of the things that the prisoners had done in their work lives, because they had a coal mine, they had not just the license plates you think of prisoners making, but
let me interrupt you too real quick. For those of you that don't know, when she says it's a massive building, do a little Google search. West Virginia State Penitentiary in Moundsville, West Virginia. It is a giant Gothic castle. They use it now for movies. There's ghost hunts on the regular there, but it's been in several big Hollywood movies, TV shows. There was just a Hulu series, I believe, that was out based on a Stephen King book. There's a lot that takes place there. So it's huge and definitely worth checking out if you want to look and see what it looks like. But sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
Oh, no, that's okay. Just wondering, for the Wonders Oddities Expo and Tri-State Exotic Animals Expo from the weekend, were you located within the prison proper or back in the courtyard where the external building are at?
It's in the external building.
Mm-hmm. And that seems to be where they have most of the events now.
It's like
because, like you said, they're...
To give like a diagram, you have the main prison that's like the front wall, and then the big stone gates around it, and then there's a building inside, within the gate.
And the reason I just ask is that's really where the main events now are held, besides the tours and the ghost hunts.
Yeah.
That's in the main building. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you knew this, but that area where they have those buildings that are put there now, the last big escape was right in that region as well. They had the greenhouse there.
Really?
And the last 3 inmates, which pretty much it was in 92. So when the state decided, well, this place is just not working anymore. The conditions are bad, and obviously people can get out. The escapees were working in the greenhouse, and what they were doing was digging a giant hole underneath that exterior fortress wall that goes around. And they would take the dirt and put it in bags and sell it to the public, or put it different places, as fertilizer. I swear, you can't make this up.
Clever.
And one of my schoolmates actually discovered the hole, as we all called it, walking home from school one day. Was like, what is that? And walked over and saw this, manhole-sized, divide, I guess you would say, in the dirt. That turned out to be where the escapees came out on the other side of the hole and ran. So that's kind of the beginning of the end for the penitentiary. But it's always an interesting tale for people who have to have an event in that same area. That's where the last famous escape occurred.
That is pretty
But
neat.
I ended up doing, also, I just threw out, and I mentioned this to you for your listeners if they're in the area, there is a prison cemetery that is not right next to the penitentiary. It's out the Creek Road, if you will, off of Tom's Run. And it's where prisoners who were not taken back by their families, taken home to be buried, were placed. And many of them don't even have names on the plastic tombstone, if you will. There are little signs that are there. They just have their inmate number.
Oh, wow.
So it's kind of sad and scary. If you're looking for something scary, the big thing used to be when people were younger, you would go out there at night when it was dark. If you're coming from Moundsville, going out in the country on Tom's Run, and your headlights would reflect off those plastic signs. It was very eerie to see hundreds of those, glaring back at you, as your lights went by it.
No, I'd say.
Kind of, a lot of people like that. They're interested in that. But that was one of my first jobs. I had to, after meeting with a congressman's staff to get more money to help research the penitentiary, I had to go in heels and a suit and hike across the creek, which is where the cemetery is, from the road, because there's just a little path where they used to bring wagons with the corpses, with the caskets over there. And in the spring, like now, when the waters rise, there is no way to get over there. You can't drive your car over. So you have to walk over. So I hiked over there and was taking recordings of the numbers of the different inmates so I could look up who they were and try to figure out who was where and do that type of thing.
Oh, my goodness.
But
gracious.
an interesting job. Yeah, it was something.
That's dedication, Delilah. That's dedication.
That's right. Or the foolishness of being young.
Oh,
One of the
yeah.
two,
Yeah.
not
Either
really.
or. Either one.
Either or. So I like to tell that story, though, about Zona Hester Shue, because that's usually considered, for us regionally, the most famous ghost story.
Now,
A national one.
yeah, I was going to
Go
say,
ahead.
you want to share a national story with us?
Mm-hmm. And it actually also has a local tie, but I like this one because it not only has the idea of a ghost story, but it does have a whodunit mystery to it as
Okay.
well. And it's mentioned in Hamilton the musical, so you can't beat that. All things. The story is about Theodosia Burr Alston, and she was the daughter of Aaron Burr. Of course, if you're familiar with the musical, everybody knows who Aaron Burr is. The reason I mention it with the musical is she is the feature of one of the songs, if you're familiar with the musical. It's even called Dear Theodosia, and Burr is singing to how, when she grows up, he is going to make this a great nation for her. And the counterpart to that in the song is Hamilton singing to his son Philip, saying the same thing. They're going to make this new nation great, and then when you kids come along, you're going to make all the difference. Kind of the idea that blow us all away. Kind of cool. Mm-hmm. So with Theodosia, Aaron Burr had a couple children with the original Theodosia, his initial wife, and she had also had a couple children from her previous marriage. They passed away, except for Theodosia, the daughter, and so he doted on her. And he felt that she needed to be raised educationally as a boy, which was very unusual if you think about that in the early 1800s.
Yeah.
Women just weren't, they weren't educated like boys were, like sons were. But he really thought she was smart and that she could lead the country. I mean, he really thought she would be something politically or in business in some way, even though people would say, well, she's a girl. He did not see it as that. And they were very, very close throughout her lifetime, because she will go missing, at least, we'll say. If she didn't die, at least she goes missing before Burr will pass away when he's in his 80s. He's fairly old when he finally passes away. Her story, though, is she is going to become very well-raised, well-educated, stands by Burr after he has shot and killed Hamilton, stands by him after he attempts to break off part of the country and make a new country away from the United States, which is a different story. But she stands by him through all these things. And she's going to actually marry the governor of South Carolina. And so marries into another wealthy family. She has power, all this prestige. Well, she would visit Burr on occasion after he comes back into the United States after some of his problems. She would visit him in New York from South Carolina. And what happens is she's taking an ocean voyage, as many people did at the time, instead of going by land, because it was a lot harsher. She goes on the ocean, on the Atlantic, and goes missing. Whole ship goes missing. Nobody knows what happens to any of them. Probably people say that there were storms that were going on around January 2nd and 3rd of 1813, and that's the last contact anyone had with her ship. So probably the ship just went down in a bad storm, but this was considered the greatest mystery of the 19th century. What happened to Theodosia Burr Alston? Because she was wealthy and well-educated and Burr's daughter and the governor's wife, what could have possibly happened to her? So all kinds of different theories what happened to her. The most prominent one that people like, the legend they like, is that pirates, everybody loves pirates somehow took over the ship. Matey, right? And of course, they made her walk the plank, right? And people years later would say, well, I was on that ship, and for whatever reason I survived, they would say. And on their deathbed, oh, yes, she was there. And proud as any woman would be, she said, I will not stand to be treated as such by, these filthy scalawags, and walk the plank to her death. Those kind of stories. That's kind of the more famous one that you hear around Hatteras Island. You hear that one more.
Yeah.
Which is a good one. The other ones, there is a story that the ship wrecked, or maybe something happened to it, and she was thrown off the ship, and she washes up on land somewhere there in the Carolinas. And Native Americans, no one knows what Native American tribe, but some Native Americans take her in, and she ends up becoming part of that settlement. And the reason why people will say, well, this story must be true, is because some people say, well, their great-great-grandfather, who was part Cherokee or Creek or what have you, had some type of a piece of jewelry that looked like her portrait was in it, her miniature was in it. So this must be what happened to her. She didn't really die, right? That's the idea. She didn't really die. She went somewhere else. Maybe her life wasn't very good, so she ran off in some way. There was another famous story that came out at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, where a family found in the family homestead in the attic a portrait of what was obviously an older Theodosia Burr, not this youthful 20-something woman that had died. So that kind of confirmed, people felt, that she must have just wanted to escape Aaron Burr and wanted to escape her husband and her life and started afresh. The ghost story, though, that goes with her is rather famous, especially if you're in the D.C. area. There is a grave marker in one of the cemeteries that is often known as the Tomb of the Female Stranger. And it's one of these very long ground tombstones, lays out across the top of the body would be. And it has mentioned that there is this nameless, unknown, female stranger that is buried here. And let me see, I have a picture of it I can look at, read it. It says, to the memory of the female stranger whose mortal sufferings terminated on the 14th day of October, 1816, aged 23 years and 8 months. Then it just kind of goes on to say she was very sick and now she's in the arms of God, but it's pretty lengthy. The story with that is this man and this female stranger come up into Virginia, off a boat. They kind of come in, nobody knows who they are, right? And she's very ill. And I won't say a hotel, but a pub that would have rooms to let. They let her and her husband come in and stay, and they call in a doctor. And apparently the woman stays there for a few days and passes away. And the mystery about this is the husband and the woman say who she is and who he is to the pub owners and to the doctor, but they swear them all to secrecy, that none of you can say who we are, once she dies, especially not her. And so the husband commissions this giant tombstone to be put, over her grave in the graveyard that's nearby where they pretty much came off their ship. The interesting bit is nobody ever does say who she is. The doctor never does, nor do the pub owners. They never mention who she is. And it's interesting, too, because the story is that the man promised he was going to pay off, the tombstone and the grave and the burial and the time spent in the pub, and ran off without paying anything, which is odd that nobody then said who they were, but supposedly that's the tale. The ghost story, though, of course, is that people see her or see someone mysterious, they can't see her face, but a younger lady always hovering around that area where the female stranger's grave is. And, you look out of the corner of your eye, look away, she's gone, and you try to approach her, it kind of gets misty and you don't see her anymore. But many people who go with that idea that Theodosia Burr just made an escape from her previous life, maybe she was really the female stranger. Because if she passed away, if you have this occurring on January of 1813, and then this is October 1816, not that long of a distance, time of distance. If that was the case, maybe it was her. So it was considered the greatest mystery at the time, what happened to her. Theodosia became one of the most famous female names, girls' names, during the 19th century because of this.
Really?
And
That's neat.
there is a very famous early female movie star named Theodosia Barr, and she was kind of the first vamp, if you want to call her goth. She wore like a really dark makeup and dark clothes and kind of gave off that kind of mysterious, like I said, that vampy look. She was named after Theodosia Alston here, Theodosia Burr Alston. So kind of a neat also tie to the supernatural and to that kind of world. She really played that up, that actress did.
That's pretty cool.
So, yeah, it's a really neat story, And there's a lot you can do, too, if, like you were saying, the idea of crime being of interest to true crime.
Yeah.
If you think of even Hamilton being killed by Burr, if you think of the musical and what you learn in history class, of course, it's all political, right? It's all political problems they had. Well, a big one that a lot of people don't talk about today because it was scandalous is that many people talk that maybe there was something going on between Aaron Burr and his daughter. He was very open with her about what he would talk about. Famously, one of his big wedding presents to her was this giant letter, which basically was instructions on how to keep your husband happy on your wedding night.
Ah!
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
What?
I swear to God. And one of the reasons why, again, you don't really hear this often, but the duel takes place between Hamilton and Burr, is that there were always rumors circulating that Burr and his daughter had some kind of unconventional relationship, let's put it that way. And that was not just Burr getting mad about the political problems that were going on between him and Hamilton. It was also because Hamilton was spreading those rumors. So who knows?
Oh,
So kind of
that dirty dog.
A dirty dog, that's right. Well, and Burr was well known after his wife Theodosia passed away. He was really well known for womanizing. He had a later wife who really got rid of him because he was just out there being an adulterer, very much in her face. He is accused of having numerous illegitimate children well into his old age, which he never really denied that much either. But he was very distraught when Theodosia went missing. And he said, I always thought this was sad, when a friend offered some hope that maybe, she is still alive, like everyone says. And Burr replied, no, she is indeed dead. Were she still alive, all the prisons in the world could not keep her from her father. So I thought that was kind of sad.
Yeah, that
sad
is.
Note. But a really interesting national story that I don't think it's a lot of play, but people hear about when they talk about DC ghost stories.
Yeah.
They talk about this tomb of the unknown, female stranger, but they often don't make that association with Theodosia, which happens to be one of the big mysteries.
All right, so up
So
next,
I like that.
do you want to give a local one or a national one? Give me one of your favorites.
Well, let me just tie, because Theodosia is my historical girl crush.
Oh.
So I love her. Well, let me just tie her into a local one. This
Okay.
kind of goes nicely. Okay. Parkersburg, West Virginia.
Okay.
If you're not from the area, it's on the Ohio River about halfway down the state. If you look from the northern panhandle to the bottom part of the state.
For those of
on the
you that are into like the Mothman lore, everything up and down the Ohio River Valley, there, Parkersburg is around where Injured Cold was spotted.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be right north of where Mothman took place. Not too awful far.
Mm-hmm. No, not far at all. Mm-hmm. Yes. And when they do have their conventions on supernatural things, they often kind of go back and forth. They'll have different stories or try to have different events between the two. They're not that far apart as the crow flies, but the roads aren't the greatest, it seems. It takes a while to kind of get between the two, even though it's a stretch. It kind of takes a while. But you're right, that moth is definitely in that region. Well, if you are also from that region, you might know that Blennerhassett Island is a small island that's in the Ohio River right off of Parkersburg.
Yep.
And this plays in with Aaron Burr and Theodosia because both of them, Aaron Burr and his daughter Theodosia, actually knew the Blennerhassets and stayed for a while on the Blennerhassett Island. The Blennerhassets had this private island. They were very wealthy from Ireland. They had to leave, though, Europe in general, because it was, again, interesting tale of family members. Harmon, the husband, was also the uncle of Margaret, his niece, and his wife. Yeah. So his sister, her mother, was not happy about this at all. And so they came to America. And my joke is always, well, when people are worried about incest, where do you go? You go to West Virginia.
Oh.
Sorry, that's my bad joke. Kind of like the wrong turn, right? That's a bad joke, the incest joke. Now, we weren't West Virginia at that point. We were still Virginia, so it's a little different. But what happened back in Ireland and in England was Margaret, the niece, was younger, obviously, and getting out of school for either winter or summer. I can't remember which one of the end of one of the terms. And her mother asked the uncle, Harmon, to go pick her up from school and bring her home. Well, when he goes and picks her up, he hasn't seen her in years, and look how lovely she is. They fall in love and, of course, get married. They elope, and the mother, not being happy, pretty much does try to chase them, even when they get to America. It's like sends people to look for them because they're in New York and Philadelphia. And again, they end up in the wilds in the early 1800s. I mean, this is, wilderness at that point in time. And they get that little island there. So it's a plantation. There are slaves that are on that island. And we'll see with Theodosia, the reason she goes there is because her father, after he's been in the duel with Hamilton, and he left and was in England for a while, and he comes back, he gets it in his mind that he is going to be involved in, I've got my timeline off, wait a second. This is before, actually, the Hamilton bit.
Okay.
What he's going to do is, sorry, my mind was off there. Sorry about that, guys. What he's going to do is, again, feeling that politically, people weren't taking him seriously enough and such, he tries to establish what people called the Southwest Empire. They'll call it that. Well, Burr goes to Blennerhassett Island to talk to the Blennerhassetts, to talk to Harmon for funding, to see if he can get some type of money or some type of supplies or so to fund this idea of his. And of course, then the Blennerhassetts would also be considered royalty, basically, in this new country. So we do see that things start to happen. Theodosia goes there. She befriends Margaret. They become fast friends. And there is a raising of money. We'll see that a flotilla is basically built over in Marietta, Ohio, across from Parkersburg. When it comes out, though, what Harmon and Burr are doing, we'll see that Burr is taken in on trials of treason. And so the same thing will happen with Harmon Blennerhassett. Of course, for Aaron Burr, things are okay. They come up with the idea that, well, you can't really convict him of anything. He may have talked about it, but he didn't actually commit treason. He didn't actually do anything besides, put together a bunch of supplies. Unfortunately for Blennerhassett, he loses his fortune, and he has to spend some time in prison because he's not as well known. I mean, he wasn't vice president or anything, so he's not as well known. The Blennerhassetts, of course, have horrible problems there. The ghost story that's associated, though, with this is with Margaret, with the wife. She apparently was a very flamboyant character. She would wear, very fancy Red Riding hoods. I mean, literally like a Red Riding outfit as she went around, which was very risque at the time. Whether a big bad wolf's around or not, that's pretty risque. And she was known to kind of be brash and abrasive and kind of speak her mind when she probably shouldn't have. Plus, she didn't really have a problem with treating her slaves poorly in public, it seems. At least that's what some accounts said. So when she passes away, and of course she has lost all her money and had to leave Blennerhassett Island and everything as well, they had lost a child, an infant girl, when they were on Blennerhassett Island, and the baby had been buried there. And over the years, people weren't exactly sure. I think until fairly recently, they figured out where the grave was. But people said for years they would see her ghost wandering the island, looking for the grave. It appeared she was searching for something on the ground, looking for something. So people assumed she was trying to find that area, kind of make peace of where the baby had laid. And that's one of those big, it's sad. It's a sad tale. But it's kind of one of those big motifs that you see in the study of ghosts that people have made an academic study now, that when there's a female ghost and that idea they're wandering somewhere in a cemetery or a piece of land, usually it's because of a fallen loved one. Especially with women, it's a child. They've lost a child in some way, and they're looking for that child or where that child was interred. That seems to be very, very common. We'll see that happening quite a bit. And that is one thing I did want to mention, that it's become such an academic area. This study of the folklore of ghosts has become so big. One of the more famous national ghost stories is at the Myrtles Plantation about Chloe, the slave girl. And before I go into it, I just wanted to mention that there is, speaking of it being academic, there is actually a dissertation that is now a book that is written about Chloe. And the name of it, I loved this, the name of it was A Critical Ethnography of the Myrtles Plantation in St. Francisville, Louisiana, with Ruminations on Hauntology.
Well, that sounds big and fancy.
Doesn't it? I thought, wow, I should have written my dissertation on a ghost story. My goodness. I thought that was great.
How about that?
But I know. But the woman who did this, apparently she worked there as a docent and a tour guide, had her own experiences, her own, instances where she saw a ghost or heard ghosts or what have you. And then she started taking stories, oral histories from people who had seen ghosts throughout the years, and was it Chloe, the most famous one, or others, and just kind of how that falls into the Gothic South, that aspect. And I love this. Speaking of something that sounds fancy, this is the first part of her dissertation here, or her book. She mentions kind of in conclusion of what she's going to talk about. She says that I will situate this journey in relation to how other scholars employ haunting and hauntology as a theoretical perspective and methodological tool before heading off in another haunted direction that explores implications for future research. Well, like you said, fancy.
That is... somebody got an A in English.
That's right, somebody got an A in English. But I thought, that's kind of fun that she did all these stories. She talked to all these people. She had her own experiences when she worked there. I just thought, I know we're going to be wrapping up soon. Do I have time to just really quickly tell the Chloe story or not?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Just in case someone doesn't know the Chloe story, probably considered the most famous haunted house in the United States is the Myrtles Plantation there in St. Francisville, Louisiana. And there are several ghost stories associated with that plantation. But the big one that most people remember, that all the shows talk about and things, people travel to ghost hunt, they want to see Chloe or find evidence of her. And she was supposed to be a slave who had worked on the plantation and was very familiar with the plantation master, with the husband of the family. Probably a concubine of some sort, lover of some sort. And at some point she had a falling out with him. And he doesn't want her to be around or not as integral a part of the household as she had been. So the story goes is that she put something in a cake that she's making for the family. Now, the story is that she thought she was just going to make them sick, make everybody a little bit ill, and then she'd nurse the children and the wife and him back to health. And, then everybody's going to love her again, and she'll be back in, the house and in good gracious. That was one idea. Others say, well, no, she meant to kill the family, which she pretty much did. She didn't kill the master, but she did kill the children and the wife. She put too much poison. Yeah. So that's what happens. So the ghost aspect of it is she's killed before even the plantation master and the officials can get to her. The slaves themselves on the plantation will hang her, basically kind of give her up. The idea that we didn't do it, it was just her, we're not hiding her, we're not trying to condone what she did. And so traditional historians, slave historians, Southern historians, will talk about that aspect of culturally between the slaves and the people who have authority and power, kind of what goes on with them, the slaves giving up Chloe. They talk more about that than the ghost aspect of Chloe coming back. And people who do study, like she's saying, this hauntology idea, What's Chloe doing as the ghost? So many people say they see her or they feel her presence. Is she there because she regrets what she did? But that's also, again, if you think of folklore motifs for female
that's another one that pops up.
they have is this idea that she regrets what she did. She's very sorrowful. Of course, hand in hand with that is, if that's not the case, is it vengeance? Is she upset? Is she trying to come back and say, I had a reason for this, or I'm coming back at the people who actually hanged me or the people who oppressed me? So what's the impetus for Chloe's ghost? What does she want? People will say, well, she's probably not residual. They think because there's such a story there, it's a strong story of what happened in her death, that she must be an animated spirit and not that idea of just a repetitive residual spirit that keeps walking up and down steps, let's say, just keeps reenacting something over and over. They feel that she's one that has more of an interaction with people. But I did want to mention that, because it's probably the most famous haunting, that tale particularly, but also because I sort of came across this major dissertation that became a book about this academic study of ghost lore, which has become so popular right now.
Yeah, that's really cool.
To mention that. I thought so too. And if you think of kind of the study of ghost stories and ghost lore with folklore, one of the earlier ideas of this, before it becomes popular in our day and age, in this latter part, into the 21st century, even in the 60s and 70s, when you have the big folklore resurgence due to Vietnam, you have that kind of the homespun grassroots movement, you have the big folklore movement, and you'll have a lot of folklore authors, people who want to gather stories and tales of such of things like spirits and ghosts. And one of the big ones in West Virginia was in the Fairmont area, which is near Morgantown, where the big university is, if you're not from the area. A lady named Ruth Ann Music. She was an English professor, but also a folklorist. They actually have a folk life center there that she pretty much put into place during the end of the 40s into the 50s. They've renamed their library for her. And she was one who studied a lot of these different characteristics, these motifs that you always see associated with folklore. And she's found a lot of them in that Fairmont region within West Virginia with the coal mining background. She found a lot of the stories of, not necessarily women, but I'm just mentioning her because she was a woman, these ideas of the coal mining spirits, where a dead miner, their spirit comes back and helps the live miners that are trapped after an accident. Or the idea of a ghost with unfinished business, right? That type of motif. Or one that wants to visit their loved ones. They're killed in some type of accident in the mines, and then they visit their loved ones afterwards to give them reassurance that they are okay, or to tell them maybe where there's some valuable stash that will help them be a little more financially secure. She kind of went through lots of areas around Fairmont and did that. One area particularly is Monongah, a little town outside of Fairmont. And if you're interested or know of labor relations throughout the United States even, this is where the biggest coal mining disaster will happen in U.S. history. Go ahead.
No, I was just agreeing with you, yeah.
Oh yes. They know that in the, was it 1906, 1907, I think, when it occurs, the explosion, they know for sure it's like 387, I think that's the number, people died because they had their tags, their identification tags. They were in the mine at the time, but they think the numbers are probably closer to at least 600, because if you brought your children in the mine, they didn't have a tag. They didn't have an identification number. And a lot of children worked in the mines with their fathers.
Oh, wow.
Also, a lot of immigrants, and a lot of immigrants and African Americans, if they had not gotten established yet in that mining town, they wouldn't have tags either. And so it's very common. You had huge numbers of people who were not documented working in those mines. And even to this day, people will tell the stories because so many people died in what's old Monongah now. There's a newer section of it, new by 20th century standards, not new what we would say today. But people will often say if they're in the old Monongah area and around, you'll see people that aren't there late at night. You'll hear sounds like explosions that aren't occurring. You'll see lights in the distance that there's nothing there. Yep. So pretty interesting. And she records a lot of that in her books. So you can find those on Amazon. She has folklore books like the Green Hills of Magic, Coffin Hollow, different books like that.
And what was her name again?
Ghost stories, mainly. Oh, I'm sorry. Ruth Ann Music. And it's like the sound of music, but there's a K at the end.
Okay.
Ruth Ann Music.
All right. Now, Delilah,
And she has several books.
because we are out of time, your whole lecture, is it online somewhere? Do you have it on YouTube or anything like that?
Yes, it is on YouTube, and it's a little less on some of the stories, and there's other stories that are combined in there, plus some true crime. But I can send you the link if you want to put it in the show notes or so, and people can go and watch. It's got a PowerPoint because it's academic, of course. There's a PowerPoint.
And if I'll do that, and just so people know that are listening that might not have access to the show notes. What do you know your YouTube page offhand?
It's not mine, it's the school's. But the school's YouTube page should be something like West Virginia Northern Community College. I would assume if you search that, you'd come across their YouTube.
And then I'll have it linked as well.
Okay, it sounds good. And I'm sorry if I went too long on just a few stories.
No, I love it.
10 I was going to tell, but
No, I love it. We'll revisit this because for those of you that listen, you know that my favorite thing in the world is hearing spooky stories. So I love it.
Great.
So
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
We'll get you back on the schedule to come on and talk about some other stories with us. So definitely we're going to do that. And Miss Delilah Ryan, horrible. See, it's like a tongue twister for me to say. Horrible HERstories.
Horrible HERstories.
Horrible HERstories. Thank you so much for coming on. I really do appreciate you.
Well, thank you for having me. I was very exciting.
And we will talk again. You have a good night.
You too.
And with that, the fire is out. I want to thank Delilah for coming on the show. I want to thank all of you for continually listening. If you haven't joined up on our social media outlets, definitely do that. We're on Facebook, Fireside Paranormal Hub. A little shout out. We did the Wonders Oddities Expo this past weekend. And as far as the Facebook group goes, I needed somebody to help me with the table because my wife Sarah was out of town. And 3 of the moderators in the Facebook group actually said they would help out. So I actually had some of the Facebook moderators, Greg, Amy, Lisa. They were all at the table hanging out. It was a really, really fun weekend. I want to thank them for doing that. We do have a lot of fun on the group. So if you haven't checked that out yet, definitely go join it. We're active on Twitter at Fireside Parapod, Instagram, TikTok. We try to have a lot of fun and try to connect with some folks. So if you do message me on there, if you want to get a hold of me, I do try to answer everybody who messages me. So I enjoy getting to know you guys. FiresideParanormal.com is the website. Check out that merch section. We got a lot of really cool designs on there. And that is all we have for this week. So until next week, everybody, don't be afraid, only believe.